Right, Abid. So what is RPA exactly?
I think the first thing that I would like to point out is that RPA is nothing new. RPA has been around for several years. In the olden days, the technology was based around taking scrapes of screenshots. And now the technology has moved forward. But there is a lot of, you can say, mysticism around the term RPA. A lot of people, they think that we're going to have robots sitting next to us and they're going to be taking our jobs. But when we talk about RPA, RPA is really software robots interacting with systems. So the way to really explain this is to say, what does a computer operator do? A computer operator will use a keyboard, mouse clicks, in order to enter data or manipulate data. So RPA is a software robot that will use the same mouse clicks, keystrokes to manipulate and enter data. So in simple terms, RPA is a software robot that mimics the behavior of a computer operator interacting with systems. So systems could be ERP, could be billing, could be point of sales, could be a host of systems.
Okay, cool, cool.
And so, yeah, very interesting, Abid. So what about, like, why would you say businesses need RPA?
I think in today's day and age, there's a lot of pressure on businesses to launch solutions, go to market very, very quickly. And the traditional, let's say, software development lifecycle, whether it's waterfall methodology, whether it's DevOps, always takes time. Mm-hmm. So for huge companies like B2Bs, typically businesses have to deal with huge IT departments or IT factories. And that takes a long time. So you find that businesses, they get frustrated because the solution that they want to give to the customer can take several months, can take even years. Yeah. They can also miss the opportunity because the business can go somewhere else. So in order to, let's say, circumvent this or avoid this, what is happening is that businesses, they've realized that RPA could be a quick way of non-invasive changes to the systems in order to deliver a solution.
Comparatively speaking, how fast? How much faster than?
Traditional software development can take anywhere between 6 months to, let's say, a couple of years. It depends on the system. If you've got an ERP system, it can take a huge time. So what companies will tend to do, they will tend to use, let's say, RPA technology. The deployment is within 4 weeks.
Wow.
So let me give a simple example. So let's say you have an employee, it's end of the month. You have some employees, they're working on the compensation and benefits because they have to pay the salaries. They have to enter the data manually, as an example. And this is painstaking. It takes a long time, right? Now, imagine you can do the same task within, let's say, half an hour. So this is where you will have a software robot, RPA, manipulating, entering the data in a fraction of the time.
Right. And so would you say, would it be a right thing to do to introduce certain targets or KPIs to measure the performance of RPA? How would you go about that?
That's a very good question, because in the beginning, a lot of companies, when they use the technology, when they play with the RPA tools and platforms, you find that there is no set KPI or measurement. I mean, senior management will say, here is the tool, please try it out and let us know. I mean, this is all fine and well, there's nothing wrong with it, but what tends to happen, the technology is so successful that it begins to mushroom. And before you know it, you don't even have any metrics or any KPIs to actually measure performance. So it's important to early on have aspirational targets and define certain parameters. So for example, you may say, okay, how many use cases are we going to go through within this year? What are the man hours that are going to be saved? What are the automated transactions that are going to be done by the RPA? What are we looking at? Are we looking at 500,000? Are we looking at 1 million? And then what are the savings? So you should have some targets in order to evaluate performance.
So basically quantifiable and qualitative type or tangible or intangible type benefits.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is important because at the end of the day, there'll be someone in the C-suite who has been charged with, let's say, digital transformation.
Yeah.
That person has to be held accountable.
Typically, who would be the sponsor for such initiatives in a telco type environment, for example?
Whether it's telco, whether it's banking, whether it's pharmaceutical, it's very important to get the right sponsorship, because what tends to happen is that RPA as a technology is being tried and tested, let's say within finance or within IT. It's sitting with a junior resource. They play around with some use cases. Some people, they like it, some people, they don't like it. And what tends to happen is that it fizzles out. It fizzles out because it's done in silos. So what you need a business champion to take ownership of the technology and to make sure that use cases are generated end to end. And then those use cases are given to, let's say, an IT department to actually turn those use cases into practical robots that are deployed in different situations and circumstances. So the sponsorship must be with the business. It cannot be with IT.
That's very, very important.
So even in a large, so let's, in the context of a large organization like a large telco, what's the kind of ideal sort of way of applying it across the organization?
I think this is a very, very important question, because a lot of people, they spend time, effort, and money setting up the tool, the infrastructure, but they don't really know how to go about applying it. And the reason being is because the use cases come from where? The use cases come from the business users. Business users are the ones who are familiar with the process. They're familiar with the choke points. So it's important that the business users are brought into confidence so they can generate the right use cases. But what typically tends to happen is that sometimes the right type of alignment doesn't happen with the business users and the expectation on the RPA front. So they may go to a business user. Now, just because a business user is using a certain process, perhaps we should try with this process. Or maybe a business user is tired of system automation and is looking for a quick fix, right? Okay, let's go for this use case. Now, these are not the right criteria to use in order to do RPA deployments. What you need to look at processes that are laborious, tedious, manual intensive, they have large handling times, and there are huge volumes, so that you can actually show ROI, because every use case is going to have a business case that needs to be justified. Otherwise, you're going to be wasting someone else's money. So it's important to have the right criteria to apply this technology. Okay, so
Abid, let's talk about the drivers here now. I mean, there is a general perception in the industry that the key driver behind the introduction of RPA is the FTE reduction, reduce employees, save your cost. Would you say that that is the key thing behind RPA?
I think it's very, very dangerous to have FTE reduction or OPEX reduction as the sole driver for RPA implementation within any organization. And there are a few reasons for this. And firstly, most of the use cases are coming from users. So if you're going to scare the users because of job security, they feel insecure.
More than that, they're actually they're in fear of their future.
Correct.
These people are like, these darn robots coming over here, taking our jobs, sort of thing. I mean, they're not interested in this at all. So, and if they're the end user and you have to get them to come on board and build the use cases, use the application, use the automation, how do you deal with that?
Well, this is a very, very important point, because what you need to do, you need to allay their concerns that their jobs are not at risk. Yes, there will be some, let's say, job reduction, but remember, RPA is good at removing mundane, boring tasks, which most employees don't want to do. And you want to free up their time so they can do productive work or more intellectual work, which is beneficial to the organization. So that's the first point. The second point is, as drivers, I mean, there's a whole host of drivers that you can use. In some organizations, you have high attrition of employees. So that's a classic area where you can actually use robots, because you can't replace human beings quickly. they require training, they require induction, there's a ramp-up time. So if you've got a call center to run, it's going to be very difficult to get resources in. So an RPA could be a classic solution. Another aspect to this.
Just on contact centers, this interesting example there is that automation can actually help you get people to the front line faster. You don't need to train them through that 700-step click-through process, but rather you can kind of truncate the process through automation to where they're, kind of triggering these processes off without actually having to have an intimate knowledge of how each application works. Maybe they're using 5 different applications, browser-based. So, and surely that would make it easier for a contact center environment, for example, to bring people to the front line quickly through the training process because they don't even have to train them as much.
Absolutely, you are spot on 100%. Therefore, if you have attrition that's very high, RPA could be a solution. Again, you could have a situation maybe in revenue assurance where you have revenue leakage. And you have revenue leakage because of some employees, they are manipulating the system. So here you can use RPA to actually remove that human weakness and make sure that your revenue leakage does not happen. So there are a host of different drivers. Another driver, which I would recommend, especially for those people trying out the technology, is for employees to enjoy and play with RPA. Because if they become comfortable with the technology, they will then become prolific in generating use cases that are useful for the organization to actually adopt.
Isn't that
from
tricky?
An RPA
Isn't that a bit
perspective.
dangerous? Isn't that a bit dangerous if you just give people that ability to willy-nilly sort of create their own? Wouldn't it just exponentially grow out of control? And how would you manage that?
It can do. But remember, initially employees are scared. There's a lot of job insecurity. They think, RPA is the Terminator. It's here to eliminate them.
Get down! This coming!
Right. Yeah.
T2.
Or if you go to the Avengers universe, AI or let's say robots are there to actually help human beings.
Save humanity.
So although we're sort of jumping the gun, but from a change management point of view, you have to introduce a mechanism whereby your employees, they feel comfortable with these new technologies like RPA and AI.
Interesting. Now, coming to the automation strategy, where would you say RPA fit into the overall automation strategy for any business?
I think the holy grail of the modern day, let's say, organization is to have end-to-end automation with zero touch or zero human involvement. So what you will have, you have a computer operator, which we have discussed. RPA can fit in there very nicely to mimic the behavior of the computer operator. Then you've got system automation. Now, system automation is your classic, you need systems because you have different processes. You have procurement to pay, you have lead to cash, and you have systems designed to give some order there and to speed up the transactions that happen end to end. So there's system automation. There is offline batch processes that run after hours. And so when we talk about automation strategy, we are talking about end-to-end automation. The missing component is that robots cannot think. RPA is not intelligent. It needs integration with artificial intelligence. So if you have RPA combined with AI, with system automation, with offline batch processes, and then you've got actually end-to-end automation taking place.
Can you give us an example of a case where you would have RPA working in conjunction with, in tandem with AI to sort of, what sort of use cases?
I mean, before I touch that point, I think if you look at, let's say, RPA platforms and tools and technologies a couple of years ago, one of the major criticisms is that the RPA is only partially replacing the computer operator because the computer operator also intelligently makes decisions and thinks. So you need to have an AI component. Now, you've got companies rebranding RPA and calling it hyper-automation or integrated automation or intelligent automation because they realize that you have to have AI combined with RPA in order to facilitate this holy grail that I mentioned of end-to-end automation.
Interesting. Now, with regards to processes in any organization, there is generally this debate that you improve your processes first, sort them out, bring in some standardization in processes. For example, in telecoms, we have ITIL and ETOM, for example, or you go ahead, implement RPA as is, and then later on deal with the process areas. What's your view on this?
Well, I think there are two schools of thought, and it depends, and it varies from organization to organization, company to company. It depends on the culture of the organization, because there are advantages and disadvantages to both approaches. So the danger of, let's say, fixing the process before applying RPA is that some of the processes are quite complex and it can take an awful long time to actually fix the process.
That's true, yeah.
Before you can use the technology.
Yeah.
And people can't wait that long. They may lose interest. And on the flip side, you can just quickly go and apply RPA. And like I said, RPA mimics behavior.
Yeah.
And if the computer operator has bad behavior, then you're going to mimic bad behavior.
True.
So you have to find a strategy for your organization that sort of blends the two schools of thought on this. So let's say for trying out the technology, I think go ahead, experiment, look at some processes and deploy software robots. But in the long term, it's in your interest to actually fix the processes in order to make them more usable, more efficient, and more valuable from the value chain point of view. And then RPA will actually make sense. I mean, I'm sure all of you are familiar with system automation.
Yeah.
A reason system automation fails is because the processes are built around the individual. So when the individual goes or disappears, the actual system automation fails. So RPA works in the same way. You have to fix the process at some point before you can deploy RPA.
But sure, you'd also see like situations where people, like you said, they have like a blended or a hybrid approach with a kind of bit of this, bit of that. What about cases where they might be using RPA as a sort of a stopgap hotfix solution to procedural issues that they might have already, whilst they work on those procedural issues to then kind of implement something like RPA that can be implemented quickly, a fraction of the cost of the software development lifecycle. Is that something you also see?
Well, it goes back to the automation strategy, which we were discussing before. I mean, like I said, system automation can take a long time. So typically, RPA is seen as a quick fix. The danger there is that if you do too much of these quick fixes, then you will make system automation more complex, because then you have to, when you do the business requirements for system automation, you have to peel away the RPA layers that you have put on. So again, that's why having an automation strategy as part of any digital transformation initiative or program is so important. So you don't duplicate the effort, you don't waste a lot of time, and RPA licenses are quite expensive. So you have to make use of that.
Yeah. Actually, let's come to the operating model now. So with the introduction of RPAs, would you say that you would have to reinvent, change significantly your existing operating model, or it'll be a completely different type of operating model? How would you?
I think this is from a C-suite point of view, it's important that they have visibility of operational changes where the RPA, let's say, function should reside. So sometimes you may have the CIO saying, look, let's say the Robotic Center of Excellence should reside within IT. Or you may have business champions saying, no, I mean, because RPA is quite easy to use, it should reside perhaps within business. I mean, whatever decision is taken, you can have a situation where the RPA operating model resides maybe in a neutral function, could be a corporate PMO, or it could be within business.
Wouldn't that defeat the object? Like you said, that ultimately what you want to do is you want to empower employees to use this technology to make their lives easier, to increase quality, to increase turnaround times or whatever. But then at the same time, you're saying that no, there should be like maybe separate, a sort of independent Can you explain that? How
Yes,
that would
I
work?
was actually just coming to that. First is the question where it should reside. I mean, if you're going to, let's say, decentralize it and give everyone the opportunity to use RPA, which, by the way, I do advocate, and a lot of companies advocate that, to democratize RPA. Yeah, that's fine. But still, you need a centralized unit that needs to do a number of things. It needs to assess the quality of use cases. It needs to understand the ROI and the business benefits. It needs to then prioritize. And there are going to be some, let's say, RPA use cases that require integration with backend systems. Now, users can't do that. That's the job of IT. So you have to bring all of these elements together within an operating model that allows you the flexibility to do that. To democratize, yes. To empower the users, yes. But at the same time, to make sure that for those use cases that give high ROI, that require deep integration with backend systems, that there is, let's say, an operating model or method of engagement with your central IT function or your IT function, IT factory that can actually deliver that is very important. So to answer your question, I would say this robotic center of excellence, you can have three modus operandi. The first one is that the robotic center of excellence actually does everything. It does all the hard lifting. So it goes and identifies the use cases, help the business users. It then also coordinates with IT, and it makes sure that IT delivers those robots. So that's probably, the first mode. The second mode is more of a hybrid mode. So when users, they become accustomed, they understand, oh, this is how you apply RPA technology, these are the criterias, and then you can actually move forward and say, okay, step back, you do some of the heavy lifting, do the business case, prioritize, and then hand it over to us, and we will then coordinate with, let's say, with the IT factory. Or there could be a different way of working, which is the robotic center of excellence becomes the main mechanism for generating use cases and delivering them. So here you take different subject matter experts from different places of the organization, bring them together, and you bring IT developers, you bring them together.
Fair enough.
And you put them all in a box.
You put them all in a box. But what happens, the great advantage of this is that you create a squad. So rather than having the typical, let's say, fallout model, which is you hand over to IT requirements and then, it still takes time. I mean, because IT will always have to check for feasibility. So if I spent a week doing a business case for a certain use case with the priorities, with the ROI, with all of this, and then IT is going to take 2 weeks to check feasibility, I've lost 2 weeks. But can you imagine a situation where that happens instantaneously? Yeah, it happens in 1 hour.
So this is a transitional sort of process, something you start off a certain way and then your organization sort of evolves into another way? Or is it something you can go straight to that, put them all in the box from day one and see how it goes?
For my expertise and for my experience, it really depends upon the organization.
Right.
But it's evolutionary. It has to be organic.
But
it cannot be imposed.
The issue I see with this hybrid approach is that companies tend to work with a year ahead or maybe a few years ahead planning. I mean, you could have a strategic planning, but I mean, in terms of, for example, let's take the example of budgets. Now, how would you plan your budgets for next year to deliver, let's say, RPA organization-wide? If it's dynamic, if you're waiting for users, for example, business users to come up with their use cases, how do you plan this in terms of your budgets?
Look, I think this question is more from a corporate planning perspective. So, for example, what you need to do, where the corporate planning works is that you have the board of governors. If it's a huge organization, they would want probably a return on their investment. So they're looking at maybe a 2x, 3x, 5x, whatever return there is over a 3-year period. So they will provide the guidance. That then goes into the senior management team and the CEO. They put their guidance into place, and through there you would then develop, let's say, a 3-year business strategy. That business strategy should then get converted into annual business, you can say, scorecards, where you may have an OPEX target, you have a revenue target, you have an employee engagement target, you have a growth target, different targets for the executives. Once you have those targets, then it can go into this yearly, you can say, budgetary planning process. But what I would add here is, once you have those targets, typically speaking, you need to then develop this automation roadmap.
Okay.
Right? So you have a business commercial roadmap. So these are the solution, products, services that they want to introduce, maybe over a 2-3 year period. And then you need to have a technology roadmap that needs to align with that. At some point, what needs to happen is that there needs to be someone who does the translation between the corporate roadmap and the technology roadmap. Typically speaking, you've got the IT capability matrix or technology capability matrix, which is written from a business point of view, but which IT or technology they need to prepare in order to deliver. So that big picture must be in place.
Right.
Otherwise, your transformation is actually going to fail. And in most cases, most companies, they don't think at that level. They are very parochially driven. And so they focus just maybe, the yearly planning cycle or maybe a 6 months ahead view. So unless you have that picture, you don't know where RPA is going to fit in, where blockchain is going to fit in, where, let's say, AI will fit in, where these technologies should fit in.
Right. Okay.
So the big picture is very, very important.
Okay, got it.
I got a question.
Yeah.
This is kind of related to, let's say, the overall approach to implementing RPA in your organization. Now, let's say I'm a telco, I'm a large organization, large telco, but I'm not interested in setting up a new department or trying to set up, having my guys do it. Can I work with a third party? Can I work with a vendor to come in and help me do this? Or is this something that I have to do as an organization myself?
So just early on, we actually talked about having this, the big picture view. From the big picture view, you probably will have a digital transformation strategy. Now, a part of that strategy, one could say, do we build an in-house capability? Or do we have a augmented in-house capability where you may draw resources in from, let's say, a consultancy to help you do the use cases, and maybe a professional service or system integrator that helps you develop those, let's say, RPA use cases into fully fledged robots. So a lot depends on the digital transformation strategy.
Right.
There is no right or wrong answer. It varies from organization to organization and on the digital transformation strategy. It could be that you don't want to mess around with a huge capex investment. You don't want to set up the infrastructure. You don't really want to.
Because I'm sitting here thinking, how do I get rid of people, right?
Yeah.
And at the same time, I'm hiring more people. Do you see how it's kind of weird?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So you don't want to be in a situation where, let's say, you want to set up this in-house capability from a resources, hardware, people.
And it takes time. There's a learning curve.
Point of view.
Yeah.
You may just go to an external partner that provides a one-stop shop. But again, it depends upon your strategy, your budget, the organizational culture, the expertise of these, let's say, SIs, because not all of them specialize in banking or pharmaceutical or telco or oil and gas. They have different expertise. So there's a lot of questions that need to be answered before you can take that decision.
You mentioned Center of Excellence a few times now. I mean, from your experience, where would you say the Center of Excellence should sit? Is it under CIO's organization, Chief Business Officer should own it, or Strategy Office? Where would Central Excellence...
Or the COPS, PMO, who gets it?
Again, it depends. It depends on the organization. It depends on the political culture. It depends on the CXO that has the most weight. So all of these are human factors, or let's say organizational, you can say, factors that have a huge bearing on where this function should go. So we should not ignore that. ideally, it should sit in between business and within technology. That's ideal.
Actually, it's very interesting because only yesterday I had a meeting with a chief strategy officer of one of the larger telco, and he immediately put us through. We had a combined joint meeting with the CIO and the CSO, and so CSO was acting almost as a sponsor, but handing it over to CIO to sort of bring in expertise from outside of their organization, because these expertise don't exist at the moment. I can probably see it from the outside sitting. They don't have these expertise at the moment. So we, as we went in there because of our digital transformation expertise and experience. So CSO arranged our discussion with CIO, and it was extremely fruitful discussions. So I can sort of link with what you just said. It was like a partnership rather than CSO sort of taking all the glory behind introducing something like RPA into their organization. So it was like a joint exercise. So I think that this fits in with what you just said.
Sure, I totally agree.